The first car in history crashed into a wall on its own test drive. 2 years later, a woman took it in the middle of the night, without her husband's permission, and on a single afternoon accidentally invented the gas station, the brake pad, and the low gear. This is the story of the Benz Patent-Motorwagen, the first automobile ever sold to the public, and the road trip that actually made it one. Karl Benz was a German engineer working in Mannheim, and by the late 1870s he'd already built something significant on his own, a reliable two-stroke gas engine, running for the first time on New Year's Eve of 1879. But Benz wanted more than a stationary engine. He wanted to build a vehicle where the engine and the frame were designed together from scratch as a single machine, not a carriage with an engine bolted onto it as an afterthought. He spent years on it, mostly in secret, funded in large part by his wife Bertha, who had used her own inheritance to invest in his workshop. By 1885, he had a working prototype, a three-wheeled vehicle with a single small wheel in front, two larger wheels in back, an exposed tubular steel frame, and a single-cylinder engine mounted horizontally at the rear, spinning a large flywheel for stability. There was no steering wheel. Cars hadn't needed one yet, because there'd never been a car before. Instead, Benz used a vertical handle, more like steering a boat than driving. According to the story that's followed the car for well over a century, its first real test run ended almost immediately when Benz drove it straight into the brick wall of his own workshop. Whether that's the literal truth or the kind of detail that gets sharpened with retelling, the early tests were genuinely rough. His son Eugen reportedly had to run alongside the vehicle at one point carrying a can of fuel because Benz hadn't built it a fuel tank yet. He kept refining it. On January 29, 1886, Benz filed a patent application for his, quote, vehicle powered by a gas engine. Patent number 37435 was granted that November, and historians now generally treat that filing date as the official birth certificate of the automobile. On July 3, 1886, Benz unveiled the finished machine publicly for the first time, driving it down the Ringstrasse in Mannheim in front of onlookers who had genuinely never seen anything like it. The car worked, but it didn't sell, not yet. Early demonstrations impressed people the way a magic trick impresses people, as a novelty, not as something you'd actually buy and depend on. What the motor wagon needed wasn't a better engine, it needed proof that it could actually go somewhere. That proof came from Bertha Benz, and she didn't ask her husband's permission to provide it. In the early morning of August 5, 1888, Bertha quietly woke her two teenage sons, Richard and Eugen, and the three of them pushed the motor wagon far enough from the house that the engine noise wouldn't wake Karl. She left him a brief note. Then she, her sons, and the third production model of the Patent-Motorwagen set off on a 66-mile trip to Pforzheim, her hometown, with no marked roads, no maps built for cars, and absolutely no precedent for what she was about to do. The car had never been driven that far, nothing had. And the trip broke almost immediately. The fuel line clogged. Bertha cleared it with a hatpin from her own hair. An ignition wire wore through and started shorting out. She stripped a garter off her leg and wrapped it around the exposed wire as insulation. The wooden brake blocks began wearing down on the long descents, so she stopped in a small town, found a shoemaker, and had him nail strips of leather onto the brakes, inventing, more or less by accident, the world's first brake lining. When a drive chain snapped, she found a blacksmith to repair it, and when the car's small fuel reservoir ran dry about 25 miles in, she stopped at the only place in Germany that sold the Ligroin solvent the engine ran on, a pharmacy in the town of Wiesloch. That pharmacy is still commemorated today as the site of the world's first gas station, even though, at the time, it was just selling cleaning fluid to a very unusual customer. Where the road climbed too steep for the engine's limited power, Bertha and her sons simply got out and pushed. By dusk, they'd made it, 66 miles, on a machine that had never traveled anywhere near that far before, using nothing but a hatpin, a garter, and a shoemaker's leather scraps to keep it running. She sent her husband a telegram to let him know they'd arrived safely. The trip made the newspapers. More importantly, it made the case Karl Benz's factory demonstrations never had, that this thing could genuinely go the distance, on real roads, in the hands of real people. Bertha came home with a list of fixes drawn from direct experience, including the leather brake lining and the case for adding a lower gear ratio to help the car climb hills, changes Karl incorporated into later production. In 1888, the Patent-Motorwagen officially became the first automobile sold commercially to the public. About 25 were built between 1886 and 1893, each one hand-assembled, each one directly descended from the machine Bertha proved on the road that August morning. Karl Benz is remembered today as the man who invented the automobile, and by patent, that's accurate. But the machine only became a product, something people could trust enough to actually buy, because his wife took it 66 miles without asking, and fixed it herself every time it broke. Do you think the automobile industry would have taken off as quickly without Bertha's trip? Or was the technology going to prove itself eventually either way? Let me know what you think in the comments.